to the debut episode of the NPH Hour here on Saga 960 AM. My name is Jason Thom. I'll be your host every week, bringing you interviews from players, coaches, program directors, influencers in the world of basketball in Canada, and just bringing to light the stories that make up the fabric that is Canadian basketball. And trust me, there are a lot of them. I look forward to bringing them to you. Now, currently, not surprisingly, the top story related to the sport here in Canada is COVID-19. From a big picture perspective, outside of a few games here or there in different provinces, the game at the grassroots level has not been played competitively in over a year. High school seniors have lost an entire season. From the traditional high school perspective, it's an experience they will never get back. From a prep school perspective, a senior season is when post-secondary programs step up to offer scholarships to student athletes. It's a life-changing moment for many young men and women looking to chase their basketball dreams south of the border. That opportunity is not there this year. From a post-secondary angle here at home, university and college sports were canceled almost immediately. Now, in hindsight, that was probably the right call. But what effect that will have on school budgets and the athletic landscape going forward remains to be seen. Canada Basketball, the men's program, was supposed to host an Olympic qualifier in Victoria, British Columbia last summer. If it can be played this summer, it will likely be without fans, which means our national program, which is a nonprofit organization relying on donations and fundraising, will lose out on millions of dollars that event would bring in. That was sorely needed for this program to fund all different portions of it. Men's, women's, grassroots, age group, everything. That really hurts. Oh, and by the way, Canada Basketball men's program was then fined almost $250,000 for not traveling to an AmeriCup qualifier because they followed medical advice to not put their players and staff into a dangerous situation. So they go from being up millions to down $250,000 because of COVID-19. How about the Raptors? Just 2 years removed from winning a championship. They're now the only team to not play a home game this NBA season. Instead, they're in Florida where the players and the coaching staff have been exposed to COVID-19, missing a number of games. I don't even care that the Raptors are struggling this year. But have you thought about if they were allowed to play here in Toronto? Would they have been safer? Would they have not been exposed to the virus? And would teams traveling in from the States to play the Raptors, would they have exposed our community to something worse than what's happening here right now? That's something we'll never know. One thing we do know, the NHL was allowed to make it work with travel between provinces. The World Junior Hockey Championship, a made-for-TV event that brings in millions of dollars for Hockey Canada and a sports television network here in Canada, well, that was still played. Even though players from other countries arrived in Canada, tested positive for COVID-19 when they were on our soil. You could understand if people within the basketball community would feel as though there are different rules for different sports in this country, right? Can't really fault them for that. What makes all of this more confusing for those that play the game, coach the game, love the game, is that high school basketball was played in the United States. All the work put in here at home by coaches, directors, referees, volunteers who have spent years building, providing high-level competition, high-level coaching, trying to keep our talent here in Canada instead of going to the U.S. in high school to try to chase their dreams. We're trying to keep them here. But the ones that stayed here were not able to play the game, but the ones that did go down south were. So they're probably pretty confused. We've watched an NBA bubble, and now an NBA season, an NCAA basketball tournament all be played while we stay sidelined up here. Basketball, I will argue, is the most inclusive sport in the entire world, a sport that is played everywhere in the world. Basketball, a sport that's exploded in this country, that reflects who makes up this country, every different culture, religion, creed, a sport that doesn't need to try to be inclusive. We don't have to have initiatives to make it inclusive. We don't have to try to convince people that this is a sport for everyone. But it's been taken away from everyone here. Kids who've used this sport as an outlet, a gathering point, a way to find mentors to help them deal with life, not just the sport. A way to connect with parents, siblings, friends, a common ground. Just gone. And it just doesn't seem fair. We'll never know how deeply this has affected those that play the game, those that need the game, to help keep them on the right path, to keep them engaged in their academics, to keep them on track to graduate, to do great things outside the sport, to keep them out of trouble, to keep them from getting depressed. This sport means so much to so many, and it's those same people that have kept the sport alive, that have pushed it forward. The passion of the endless volunteers coaching teams, working score tables, driving kids to games, parents buying the team lunch because they know not all the kids have money to pay for pizza. This sport has elevated to an amazing point in the mainstream that everybody understands basketball in Canada is alive and well. But right now, it doesn't feel that way. And how do we make sense of all of that? For those playing the game right here, right now, that can't do it, how do we make sense of that? I can't make sense of that. So I tried to find a doctor who could. And how do I find a doctor who can speak directly to the basketball community? Well, find a doctor that's a part of the basketball community. Dr. Andrew Morris. Not only a doctor on the front lines trying to fight this global pandemic right here at home, but one that is also on the Ontario COVID-19 Science Advisory Table. He's coached for over 30 years in our community. Right now, he's a coach for the U15 Girls North Toronto Huskies Morris team. And he's had to consistently share this information with them that it's not safe to come back to play basketball right now. And I could not find anybody better to come on to this debut show to tell us why it is not safe. I think the biggest thing, Doctor, is everyone has this pandemic fatigue, obviously. And then related to basketball, we've sat back, we've watched the NBA play in a bubble, play a season now. Fans are coming back. The NCAA tournament returned this year. American high school has been going on. I think a lot of Canadian basketball people are just saying, well, how come it's safe for them and not safe for us?
Yeah, well, I think there's two things to unpack there, at least two things. First of all, I'm not sure how safe it is for them. Certainly the NBA bubble was a huge success. There's no question, and that made a huge difference, and really protected the players, the officials, and all the other team personnel. But as a Toronto Raptors fan, it's pretty obvious that COVID has affected the Raptors pretty substantially, and that's with really state-of-the-art attention to trying to prevent infection, including daily testing. And still, despite that, a number of players were infected. And I think you can also see that it not only infected them, but I think it reflected in their play, certainly returning back. And we've seen this throughout college sports as well, that numerous games were canceled, leading right up until the tournament, right? So I guess it was VCU, lost their tournament spot because of COVID. So, and it hasn't been without a huge amount of effort, right? So I know, because one of my former players plays for the Stanford women's team, Alyssa Jerome, and I know that they've been essentially bubbled as a team for about 8 weeks. So even with extraordinary efforts, and they have had to be really quite extraordinary, it hasn't been smooth sailing down in the US. They have now tons of vaccine in the US, so they're really far ahead of us. They're not out of the woods by any stretch of the imagination, though, and they're about to enter their next wave. I don't know how bad their next wave is going to be. It's hard to tell. It's patchy. In some states, it's actually getting quite bad.
You touched on it, and I think that's the big thing that I really wanted to get to is the long-term effects. And I know we don't know that yet, but we are starting to see it. And you brought up the Raptors, and Fred VanVleet brought it up the other day that in the middle of a game, they all hit the wall at the same time. And I've talked to a number of players, high school, NCAA in the US that have contracted COVID, and they got through it, but they're not the same athletes. Is there anything you can say that we do know definitively, how this can affect an athlete specifically?
Yeah, so we don't know tons yet about what's been described as long COVID. Long COVID is really the after effects. Once the virus is gone, in general, you feel like you've cleared the infection, but there are lingering effects. What we do know is that a large number of people who have had COVID have especially fatigue. That fatigue for many people lasts for months and months. On top of that, exercise tolerance also appears to be down substantially. And then there's a whole bunch of other effects that people have, and that includes, daily complaints of headache. Uh, you know, um, some people describe fog brain, so they just feel like they're in a fog, or they can't necessarily hear, or sorry, think so clearly. And really, there pretty well every part of the body has been described, at least by some people, as being affected, and it can last quite a while. I think one of the other things that's really important is that, most of us believe that the disease that's circulating right now, in many ways, is a different disease than was circulating a year ago. These new variants really appear to attack younger people more than the prior strain did, and it's for reasons that we don't really understand. But we're seeing younger and younger people in our hospitals and in our intensive care units. Uh, it is not unheard of for me to be taking care of people in their 20s and 30s, on ventilators. And we really didn't see much of that in the first wave. I don't think that kids per se are going to be as much affected, and I think that's been true for most infectious diseases. To be honest with you,
Mm.
kids just don't get nearly as affected as adults for many of them, at least in a severe way. Um, but they do sometimes get affected, and I think we don't really have a very good understanding of the long-term effects on kids in particular. And we will learn this over time, but this is not just your simple runny nose or cold for some people, not all, but for some people for sure.
You mentioned the variants, and we sit back and we see in the high school realm, they're playing down south competitively in different areas. And what shocked me is like they're not playing with masks. And is that something that you see could help the sport return sooner than maybe if we didn't use that? Like, what is the biggest challenge to get the sport back here in Canada?
Yeah, so I think I really want the sport back up here in Canada, so I think that's the first thing. um, we're at the stage right now where we really just can't, because there are just so many cases and it's so overwhelming. And I just can't emphasize enough how quite overwhelming it is to our system, and it's going to continue to be that way for at least several weeks. I think a good starting point is to have kids outside and being playing with outdoor hoops as the weather gets warmer. I know there aren't enough outdoor hoops. We definitely need more outdoor hoops, and that isn't just for COVID purposes. I think we need just many more outdoor hoops so that there's more kids playing ball and shooting hoops. But on top of that, I think masking would go a long way. We're never going to get it down to zero, but what we're just trying to do is get it better. And we know there's many studies that show that masks don't affect your oxygenation at all. So it's really just getting used to wearing masks. And, there was a time, I'm old enough to remember, where there was a huge uproar because hockey players wouldn't wear helmets or visors or really anything, because it was felt that helmets would interfere with their ability to play, and visors would affect that. And I think we've learned that most of that is just, athletes getting used to, different standards. And I think the same thing can happen with masks as well.
You come at this from a lot of different angles. And how has this affected you, maybe personally, or with the kids that you coach or kids that the fact that the sport hasn't been played, and the effect that it is having? I mean, our youth sports season was wiped out before it started. Our high school season, we've been working to keep our Canadian kids home instead of going down south to prep schools as much as it became so prevalent. But that this year, it's wiped out an entire season. What have you seen, or maybe, how have you felt about it from being on both sides of it as well?
Yeah, it's been really difficult. In fact, just this week, I told my girls team that finally, which would have been the first time since the fall, we were going to get together outdoors to practice, which I still believe is a very safe thing to do. And we were just going to go do stuff on the field and just start getting them back in shape and getting them together and being able to socialize. And then, 2 days later, after the Ontario government's announcement, I had to cancel that. And there were more than a few teary face emojis sent my way. And and to be honest with you, being a basketball coach is part of my identity. And not being able to coach has really affected me quite profoundly. On the other hand, I'm a doctor, and I'm an infectious disease doctor, and I've seen the worst of what this has done to people. We have lost coaches in the coaching community to COVID. We've lost parents in the basketball community to COVID. And almost certainly there are many people who have lost some, at least extended family members along the way. All you have to do is look where COVID has affected Ontarians, and it's really in the basketball hotspots where it's affected, which I think makes this even more challenging. So it's been it's really saddened me, to be honest with you. And I have three daughters. One still plays, and she's been uh, you know she's really missed out on a whole season of all the things that basketball brings to her. And it's very upsetting, and I feel bad for especially kids in their final high school year, for example, or those who are looking to showcase their talents and move on at various levels of basketball. And I just think it's absolutely tragic, and it's a shame that they've been the collateral damage of all this.
Doctor, thank you so much for your time. And I want to also thank you for the work you've been doing. A great follow on Twitter for educational purposes. And also thank you for the time that you volunteered, like you mentioned, 30 years as a coach. And I know we don't get to say thank you enough, but thank you for all of that and everything that you do. And hopefully sooner than later, we can get the sport back that we all love. And I know you want to see that as well.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
That was Dr. Andrew Morris from Mount Sinai in Toronto, a member of Ontario's COVID-19 Science Advisory Table and a coach of 30-plus years in the basketball community. Some sobering information there that we are seeing in real time right now here in Ontario. On a basketball tip, he eased into that interview that he previously had coached Alyssa Jerome, the same Alyssa Jerome as a member of the 2021 NCAA champion Stanford Cardinal. And guess what? She's coming up next on the NPH Hour right here on News Talk Saga 960 AM. Considering this is a new endeavor for the team here at North Pole Hoops, the goal for this first edition was to make it impactful for our basketball community while also making it insightful for casual listeners who may be new to the Canadian basketball landscape. And here is something you all need to know. Our Canadian women have accomplished more on the world stage than our men. Canada Basketball's senior women's national team is ranked 4th in the world. They've already booked their ticket to the next Olympics, while our men are in a last chance attempt to qualify this summer. And in the NCAA tournament, there was Canadian-born and trained women on each of the final 4 teams. And in the championship game, Canada was represented on both teams. And we got both of those incredible young women on this show for you. First up, Toronto's Alyssa Jerome, who chatted with me this week just days after the Stanford Cardinal won a national title in the most unique college basketball season ever. 2021 NCAA national champion. How's that sound?
Sounds pretty good. Doesn't feel real yet. I feel like there's a mistake there still, but it hasn't fully sunk in. But yeah, it's really crazy.
It must have been a whirlwind. And actually, I had your former coach, Dr. Andrew Morris, on earlier in the show, and he just dropped it in the interview that he was a former coach of yours. And pretty cool, though. Like, have you had kind of people from your past reach out with a congratulations and make it really realize just how big of an accomplishment this has been?
Totally. I think that's kind of what's making it sink in more, just hearing from all these people who I haven't heard from in a while, whether it's old coaches like Andrew or just, people from my high school, people that I've met in passing, just saying we watched the tournament, we loved supporting, especially Canadians really loved, following the journey with such a prominent, Canadian force in the tournament. So yeah, it was really, really cool to hear from all those people.
Now, for those people watching from back home, they see the tournament go on, without any issues, outside of, limited fans. But for your team, it came with some pretty huge challenges early in the year. You had to fully relocate to another state. Just tell us about that and the challenges that came with that.
Yeah, so Stanford is in Santa Clara County, and they had really, really strict COVID protocols, which didn't allow us to compete at Stanford. So we kind of found this out like one morning and frantically were looking for a plan of what to do. We were able to kind of have a home base in Vegas because of an old coach that used to coach at Stanford who was at UNLV. So we were able to be there for a while, but and then from there we kind of moved around all over the place. We were on like a 80-something day road trip, which is crazy looking back on it and thinking about that. Yeah, it was quite the journey, and I think it made the winning the championship even that much sweeter.
That must, galvanize the squad as well. Like, was there any point throughout this season or in the tournament where you all kind of looked at each other and were like, listen, like, we're going to be able to overcome this because we didn't go through all of that to lose this game?
Totally. I think every step of adversity, we kind of looking back on it all, we were like, we exactly like you said, we didn't go through this for nothing. And I think it also really prepared us for the structure of the NCAA tournament, having to be in one hotel for 3 weeks. We're like, oh, that's nothing. We got that because we'd done that before. So I think it really helped us. And I think throughout the whole year, we really had to lean on each other. We were all we had. We weren't back at school. We couldn't see family. So I think that really brought us as a team so much closer.
Now, to be a part of anything great always comes with a level of sacrifice. For you personally, like, I knew you as a star high school player coming out of Canada, and you go to Stanford, obviously a massive school with such a rich basketball history. But as your career goes on, your minutes actually go down. And, you obviously had to sacrifice personally for the betterment of something greater. Did the championship come with some affirmation for you that buying into that bigger plan was worth more than any personal gains that you could have got maybe by, say, transferring out or something along those lines?
Yeah, definitely. I knew coming to Stanford in high school, it was going to be a challenge, and I was ready for that. And, I think definitely throughout the years, getting less minutes, it's definitely discouraging, but I kind of took that as a challenge. And, I was going to continue to work hard regardless. And if I had to accept a new role, I would accept that and put all my effort into that and do the best that I could for that. And yeah, I think choosing a place that's right for you is really important, and kind of sticking with it and dealing with whatever comes. Of course, there are some situations that, aren't the best and need to change, but I think really sticking with it, I think I've grown so much just this past year of kind of, putting my own feelings and things like that aside and being ready for the team with whatever they need. It definitely isn't always easy, but I think it was worth it with the national championship now.
And there's a point in everyone's life where you kind of realize, especially related to sport, that sometimes personal growth is more important than athletic growth. Was there a time, was your involvement with Canada basketball and the veterans involved in that program and lessons that they taught you that really, maybe made it easier for you to make that decision?
Yeah, I think, just hearing about everyone's journey is so different. And I don't think that there's a right way to do anything. And I think you gain so many valuable lessons. Just looking back on this year, the amount of lessons that I've learned that are like so beyond basketball and that I can apply to so many different facets of life was honestly something that I will never regret, deciding to stick with it. And I think talking to all these different girls on different journeys and their decisions and things like that, I think it's really helped me gain perspective. And my journey isn't the same and it can't be compared to others, but that's okay.
Now, what was it like to be in a Final Four with three other women who are also a part of the Canada basketball family? And three of you actually made history in winning a gold medal back in 2015 at the U16 FIBA Americas. One of them, Shaina Pelington, who was in that championship game with you, who I'm going to have on the show later. Very cool to also have that moment post game. Great accomplishments for both of you. And how cool is that to kind of see it come full circle?
Totally. It's so cool. I've grown up playing with those girls. We'd spend like days after school training or going to these international tournaments, like you said, the FIBA Americas in Mexico or a ton of other ones, and just kind of coming full circle and seeing them on the court. I think it's a testament to them and their hard work, but I also think it's a huge testament to Canada basketball and all that they're kind of investing. And we've seen that Canadians in the NCAA tournament, there are so many, and I think that's just really, really incredible. And I think that's a huge inspiring thing for young Canadian players that you can do it. When I was in high school, there weren't that many. I think Kia Nurse was the only one who had won a national championship before me. So I think now just seeing that another Canadian's done it, and there were 4 Canadians in the Final Four, I think it's really inspiring.
And cool full circle moment. Kia Nurse is on the broadcast here at TSN while you guys are playing on the court. It just shows how far women's basketball has come here in Canada, but then also how much further it's going to go, you inspiring all these next level of girls that are going to be coming behind you.
Yeah, I hope so. I hope that, girls and boys being from Canada, it's definitely not a disadvantage. I think just the explosion of basketball, with the Raptors and just all the popularity and traction that it's gaining. And now, thankfully, a lot of our games were broadcasted, like you said, on TSN in Canada. And I think that that's huge to just kind of gain exposure and traction in Canada.
So I know it's been a whirlwind, but I mean, now you cap your senior season with an NCAA championship. When that kind of fully absorbs into you and you get back home to Canada, what do you think you're going to take away from this more than just hardware in a ring, but, I guess relationships and personal growth? Have you had a chance now to really realize, okay, like, this is going to set me up for future gains, not only on the court, but off the court as well?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I mean, it still hasn't fully sunk in and it still feels so surreal, but I think just saying national championship, you really realize how special that is. And, after the game, we were talking as a team in a circle, and just, Tara and Stanford hasn't won a national championship in 29 years. And I think that just shows how hard it is, first of all, and how special it is that in order to do that. And I think, especially with a year like this and everything that we had to overcome, I think the big thing is sticking with it and sticking together. I've made relationships with friends or with teammates and coaches and the Stanford community that I'll hold on to forever. And we have this shared experience that we've been through. And I think that that's something really, really special. Yeah, I don't know. It still feels so crazy. I'm sure there will be other, realizations down the road of things that I've gained from that. But yeah, it's crazy.
And a pretty great education to go along with all those athletic memories as well, right?
Yes, which I'm very thankful for, definitely.
Alyssa Jerome, 2021 NCAA national champion. Thank you so much for coming on the NPH Hour, and I look forward to seeing more from you both on and off the court and inspiring the next wave. I know you were a former coach as well for a junior team your last year of high school, so I know you have great things ahead of you, and congratulations.
Thank you so much.
Toronto's Alyssa Jerome achieving a childhood dream and inspiring young men and women here in Canada at the same time. You heard her mention that one of the girls she grew up playing against and with was her opponent in that title game. Shaina Pelington also achieved great things in her own right this season, and it came with some adversity as well, but in a very different way. Shaina Pelington of the Arizona Wildcats is coming up next on the NPH Hour on News Talk Saga 960 AM. We're back to the NPH Hour here on News Talk Saga 960 AM. I'm Jason Thom. I hope you've enjoyed our maiden voyage thus far. Now, the NCAA season that just finished up was definitely a challenge, and the NCAA itself is still facing those challenges even though they executed a men's and women's basketball tournament that in a normal year with full arenas generates about $1 billion. Now, they're faced with a groundswell of support for these student athletes to be able to make money off of their likenesses and to be compensated for playing sports that injects millions of dollars into each school. Currently, the players get nothing. They get an education, though. As a result, the NCAA is starting to ease restrictions in other areas, including a transfer rule that looks to be gone forever. Until now, any student athlete that decided to leave their program within the first 4 years to join another program had to sit out an entire calendar year before being able to compete in an NCAA game with their new school. That's exactly what happened to Shaina Pelington. After a stellar rookie season at the University of Oklahoma that saw her win Big 12 Freshman of the Year honors, the next season she found herself in the doghouse with her head coach. So she decided to transfer to Arizona, and as a result, she went 550 days without a competitive game. Over a year and a half. Now, last August, a number of players that left the program spoke out on social media about racial insensitivity that they faced under head coach Sherry Cole. That included Shaina Pelington. Cole was beloved in her home state of Oklahoma. She reached the Final Four 3 times in the last 20 years and is a member of the Women's Basketball Hall of Fame. That's a powerful person in the collegiate basketball world when you're a young player. So in my personal opinion, it takes a big person to bite their lip, sit out over a year and a half to get themselves into a better situation. And that is what Pellington did. She bet on herself and played an impactful role for an Arizona Wildcats team that made it past the Final Four, all the way to the NCAA tournament final, while her former coach decided to retire just last month. But as you can tell from this interview, Pellington is not carrying any of that baggage with her. She is playing free and living life, which is all any player can ask for. Shaina Pelington, Pickering's own, and now a household name, I would like to hope, across Canada and across North America. Thank you so much for joining me here on the NPH Hour. And Shaina, you're just a couple of days removed, but, you know, I know you didn't end up winning the game, but you have to feel great about all the accomplishments, both as a team and personally this season.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, I definitely am. Getting that experience, playing the national championship game was awesome. And coming back, I mean, obviously there was some emotions there, but we're so proud of ourselves for getting to that point and believing in ourselves when nobody didn't. So it's extremely important to us.
Personally speaking, 550 days without playing a basketball game. What was that? What did you go through during that time in your transfer where you couldn't play competitively? You know, we talk so much about mental health and how important that is. You know, take me through that. How tough were the low days during that time?
It was extremely tough. There was a lot of low days. I mean, during that period, it wasn't just developing as a basketball player. It was honestly, most of that time is developing as a person, getting that time to really reflect on who I wanted to be as an individual outside of basketball. That was really important for me in my development. which a lot of people may not know about. But 550 days, I mean, that's insane. I mean, to go from playing competitively to, not playing at all for over a year is insane, literally. And then on top of that, have to deal with the pandemic during that time. Like it was so different. It was a really different experience for me, but I'm glad, honestly, that I went through it, because I felt like I grew a lot from it, and I matured a lot from that experience.
And I'll be honest, like that's why I wanted to talk to you. It's great that you made the championship game, but from when I first met you about 4 years ago to now, the changes in you that like just take people through that of Oklahoma. You were the freshman of the year of the Big 12 conference. And then the next year you go to not playing and just, a lot of off-court issues. And I think a lot of that had to do with maybe the culture shock of going to a place in the States like Oklahoma and being who you are. So just from a personal growth standpoint, like what did you have to face?
I mean, I had to face a lot. Kind of like I remember posting a tweet on Twitter, just speaking on some of the issues that I went through, that people didn't really know much about. But like you said, it was a different culture, different environment. I mean, I loved being on campus. I loved, like the campus atmosphere was great, but outside of that was difficult. There was a lot of different cultural values that didn't align with who I identified as a person, and that was really something that I struggled with for a long time, being there, and it affected my mental health. It affected me as a person, and it eventually just got to the point where I needed to make the move to better myself as an individual and be comfortable with who I am and who I identify as a person. So I think at the end of the day, it was the best decision for me, and I'm grateful that I did make that decision at the end of the day.
And we see, some transfer changes coming now on the NCAA level. You didn't get to enjoy that. You, like we mentioned, you sat out over a year from switching from a program, like you said, that you just didn't feel comfortable with personally. How much has that freedom helped you as a player? Is that what we saw on the national stage? You being able to play with that openness that you now feel off the court at Arizona, now that coming through on the floor?
Yes. I mean, the switch when I transferred from Oklahoma to Arizona, there was quite a few things that I was looking for. And like you mentioned, that openness, that freedom to be who I wanted to be, and also be able to develop a great relationship with my coach. That was one of the main things that was on my list when transferring to Arizona. And yeah, at the national championship stage, up until that point, the year wasn't the best for me. It wasn't the best. Different circumstances. I mean, I was playing behind an All-American point guard, but I'm super grateful for that, because I learned a lot as a player playing against her every day. She's a phenomenal player. But it was a different environment for me. It was something that I wasn't used to, but I'm really excited that Adia Barnes gave me the opportunity to, be who I am on the court at the highest levels, at the national level. And I was able to produce and be me, be free on the court. So I think that's what you guys saw there, and I'm glad I was able to do that.
There's been lots of studies done on adversity, and adversity needs to be faced, especially by athletes, on how much that can help you. And it sounds like that is where you are at as a person and a player right now, of having to come through that adversity, getting you ready for anything you were to face. And isn't it amazing to see everything that you were facing behind the scenes now come to light in every aspect across North America? Black Lives Matter. The LGBTQ movement, the acceptance of people for who they are. What's that like for you to go through that personally, somewhat quietly, and then be able to get that out to a mass audience because now you're okay to talk about it?
I mean, it's phenomenal. I mean, like you mentioned before, my story and the adversity I faced with my career, it's something that I wouldn't wish for anybody to deal with personally. But it's something that has developed me to be the person that I am today. So I'm grateful for all those experiences. But like I said, that 550 days, so many things have happened, not just basketball wise, but just in the world.
Yeah.
Like you mentioned, the LGBT movement, the whole situation with Black Lives Matter movement, just a lot of stuff. A lot of stuff has been happening in the world, and there's been a lot of stuff to deal with. And like you mentioned, like because of my development as a human being, I felt like it was important to speak on these topics. And that it was important that for me personally to use my platform to influence or discuss with different athletes that might be going through the same thing. So yeah, I mean, just this has been a crazy span, 550 days, new president, new everything. It's been a lot to adjust to. But yeah, it is a phenomenal, I do have a phenomenal story, and I wouldn't trade that with anybody else's ever. So.
And quickly, I want to go back to Team Canada basketball. Your involvement, won a gold medal back in 2015, and some of your teammates from that team were in that Final Four with you, Letitia Amaher and Alyssa Jerome, to name a few. What was it like to be able to see other teammates of yours succeed on that level, and the fact that you had already played on this huge level in the FIBA Americas and winning the gold medal? How did that prepare you and probably your teammates for the biggest stage of women's basketball in the NCAA tournament, the Final Four?
I mean, it was phenomenal. It was really cool to see like my previous teammates throughout the age group national teams I participated on, playing against them at that level. I mean, like, and honestly, personally, I feel like we are all more than equipped to play at that level. Just like what you mentioned, like we got to play and experience playing at a national world level at a very young age. So we were all more than prepared to shine when the lights are on. And it wasn't a surprise for me to see them there. I know they're phenomenal players. We all are. And I knew, and it was just a surreal feeling to know that no matter what, even in a championship game, no matter what, Canadian was going to bring some hardware home playing at the highest of levels, which was awesome. It was awesome. It was a really cool experience, and I hope a lot of Canadians were able to look at that and see that it is possible. It's more than possible to get to that level and excel. But hats off to Alyssa, obviously, for winning the national championship. I'm super excited for her and her team. They're a phenomenal team, and they have a phenomenal coach. And especially Letitia. I mean, like playing for Dawn Stanley, like that's crazy. Like she's one of the best coaches ever. But Letitia is also another one of those phenomenal players that were identified at a really young age. And I'm not surprised that I saw her there either. So it's just like, it's really cool. It's really cool to share that experience with them.
I know, very busy time for you getting back into being a student athlete now. Thank you for taking the time. And like I said to you before we started this up, an absolute inspiration for more than one reason, not just on the floor. I've been following you, your social work, your social media activism. I think there's women in this country and girls in this country that are not only going to see what you've done on the basketball floor, but are getting to now feel more comfortable about themselves going forward in this world for what you've done. So, on behalf of everyone, thank you very much, and great job in everything you've done.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Shaina Pelington and Alyssa Jerome, two players that took very different paths since leaving Canada as highly touted prospects, but they both ended up on the biggest stage at the NCAA tournament final. Meanwhile, Kia Nurse, the last Canadian woman before Jerome to win a national title, was covering the event for TSN, continuing her dual role as TV analyst before continuing her career as a WNBA star. Now that's full circle. Telling you, women are killing it right now in this game coming out of Canada. Next week, I'm going to speak with Carly Clark, a member of the Canadian women's high-performance coaching staff who has coached all of these women. She will share with me the plan their program put in place years ago that is now bearing fruit in so many different ways for the sport here in Canada and abroad. Also next week on the NPH Hour, I will have Courtney Charles, Vice President of Basketball and Franchise Operations of the Raptors 905, to talk about his unique path through the Raptors organization and what their franchise values when it comes to people and personnel. While Kadre Gray, the newest signee of the Ottawa Blackjacks of the CEBL, shares with us his basketball journey that took him, of all places, to Sudbury, Ontario. Not exactly a basketball hotbed. But it resulted in Gray having a stacked trophy case, amazing personal development, and a contract to play professional basketball. Everyone's path is different in this amazing sport, but it is what you make of it, what you put into it, that means more than where you end up. And to the young players out there waiting to get back onto the floor right now, keep that in mind, because if you're not making yourself better during this downtime, someone else is. And when the game is back, you don't want to be the one realizing you could have done more, while others have used this time to attack their own weaknesses. I'm Jason Thom. This has been the NPH Hour on News Talk Saga.